In your book, Mao and Markets, you point out that China basically has a kind of state-run capitalism, but many Westerners, including political elites, truly don't understand that. What do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions and misunderstandings that America and the Western world have about China's economy?
Sure. Yeah. Interesting question. Thanks for asking about my book. I appreciate it. So I think, there's a couple things that I think are real important to keep in mind, and I'll point out. So one, for a very, very long period of time, I mean, this dates back, really potentially even to Nixon, but certainly to, George H.W. Bush, sort of the second Bush president's father. There was this idea that, as the markets opened up, as China prospered economically, that they would actually also liberalize politically and potentially, become a democracy. And I think this is, sort of something in economic development theory. And so this was, from the first George W. Bush to, this was the rationale, that under the Clinton administration, China was led into the WTO, World Trade Organization. So, this is not just, again, I mean, one party or the other. I think that both, the Republicans and the Democrats really deeply believed that that in some ways, if China liberalizes its economy, they'll become more like us, without actually realizing that actually China has its own set of sort of economic institutions, political institutions. And it's kind of, I don't know, egotistical or sort of self-centered to think that, just because people are similar economically to us, that they'll then become, like us in all other ways. And so I think that, what's really important is to understand actually that there are a set of political institutions, political ideology, that actually some are based in Confucian ideas, but really, as we discuss them in the book, really date, or sort of look to Mao, in how, really it's the CCP and the government at the center, ports of nationalism, and other factors, which I think are really important as the U.S. continues to compete with China, to keep in mind. I think a second general sort of issue is that, in the West, there's a lot of research in cross-cultural psychology that has discussed difference in sort of cognitive mindsets between the West and the East. And in the West, we see in some ways the state and the economy as analytically distinct and not necessarily. And so I think this is why you see a lot of discourse in the US, sort of people get labeled, oh, you're a socialist. And that is seen as a bad thing, because the idea that, if you try to bring the state into the market, that would just create all kinds of problems, and actually everyone would be worse off. But I think, in China, or first of all, in Eastern sort of, what psychology has shown in Eastern context, China being one, or Japan, or Korea, is that there's actually a much, individuals focus much more on relationships between items, and sort of obvious contradictions can sort of coexist. So a real simplistic example of this is sort of the yin and yang symbol that is sort of famous, where it's sort of the melding of, black and white. They can exist and sort of create each other and sort of be part of each other. And this is, I know for this thing, it's very, very simplistic. People can follow up. I can send them some studies if they're interested. So what this means is that, so in China, actually having this close relationship and almost interpenetration of the state and the market is not sort of, cognitively, challenging. And I think that, Deng Xiaoping, after Mao died and he started to reform Chinese economy in the late 1970s, he had all these different sayings, that, this, I don't know, something like the state and the market are just tools. So a little bit of state, a little bit of market, we're just trying to accomplish, economic growth. And so he could see them that actually these were not necessarily competing. They were just, separate tools. And then, also the famous, very evocative one was, it doesn't matter if it's a black cat or a white cat as long as it catches a mouse. And so I think this is a second area that's a little bit deeper, that I think, the idea that actually the state and the economy can be very closely related. It's not a contradiction, and that actually, can lead to growth as well.
If you want to know how entrepreneurship and economy actually work in China, you can find your answers in Professor Christopher Marquis' new book, More and Markets. The purchase link is in the description of this video. Thank you very much, Professor Marquis, for being with GCC today.
Thank you, Tim. Really happy to be here.